Hi, I'm David Debato, and this is the No Delusion Zone. Today, my very special guest is Todd Wolfson. Todd is president of the American Association of University Professors, which is a nonprofit organization of higher education faculty and other academic professionals. For the last 6 years, he's been in leadership of the Rutgers AAUP and the American Federation of Teachers, which represents 6,000 faculty, grad workers, postdocs, and counselors at Rutgers. Wolfson is an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Rutgers University, and he is an anthropologist by training who's written and edited 3 books: Digital Rebellion, The Birth of the Cyber Left, The Great Refusal, Herbert Marcuse and Contemporary Social Movements, and the Gig Economy, Workers and Media in the Age of Convergence, along with dozens of peer-reviewed articles. He's also co-director of the Media, Inequality, and Change Center, a partnership between the University of Pennsylvania and Rutgers. Prior to his work as an academic union leader, Wolfson worked as a community and labor organizer in the great city of Philadelphia. And in a recent piece in Higher Ed, he was called a real mensch. And since I don't get enough real mensch on the No Delusion Zone, I'm very happy to have him here. So without further ado, Todd, welcome to the No Delusion Zone. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me, David.
As I said off air, there's a lot to cover here. I'm not going to pull any punches. Anyone that's ever listened or read anything I've written knows I'm not a great fan of MAGA at all, or Donald Trump. I happen to think he's an illiterate narcissist who is an existential danger to our country. We're in real danger right now. And as you're going to talk about, higher education is one very important part of that existential danger. It's one part of the stool that they're trying to kick out. And I want to cover as much of that as I can within the time frame that we have. When you ran for president, you ran under the slate of United Faculty for the Common Good. The common good is something we are really, really lacking here now in the United States. It's all for one and none for anybody. The common good is just I'm glad you ran under that, because that's something we don't have today in today's polarized environment. Todd, what would you say? I'll just start off. What would you say is the biggest danger to America under MAGA, not only to higher ed but to America generally, by the Trump administration's anti-education, anti-science policies?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess to start the most broadly, I think that the Trump administration um, has shown very clearly in this second time around in leadership that they plan to step on as powerfully as possible anybody who shows any dissent to their agenda. And so, you know, that the roots of that are authoritarian or fascist, and so I think the greatest danger, the gravest danger we face is black backsliding from an imperfect but still democratic country to a country that is ruled by authoritarians and oligarchs. And so, we can get into what this means for higher ed, why they're targeting higher ed, where science and education fit into their agenda. But when we talk about the gravest danger, I think the gravest danger is our freedom and democracy in this country. That is under threat. And that means that, last week they maybe picked up and abducted, maybe not last week, but a couple months back, a student on a green card. But next month, it might be American citizens. And they've already said very clearly that they're comfortable with trying to denaturalize American citizens and send them overseas. And so we're talking about the gravest threats this country's ever experienced, from I would say a small tyrant, but the power amassed is not small. And we would be naive to not recognize that the power that Trump and his allies have amassed right now. I've never seen this much power arrayed. Now, again, even with all that power, they're over their skis, and I think that we're going to come back around and move a real progressive agenda forward because of how they've overshot the mark. But nonetheless, the power they have is extreme.
Well,
And
I want to
so,
circle back to some
yeah,
specifics, but and just in generally, I'm really curious as to your thoughts because you've spoken about this before. About this isn't new. Trump's new, MAGA's new, but they're not saying anything new. In fact, they're carrying out a decades old agenda by the Republican Party, by the conservatives. Do you want to talk about that going back decades? That
yeah,
this is just the latest battle, as serious as it is. This is the latest battle in the Republican war on higher education.
yeah, that's a great place to start. And I'll say one historical piece and then go into that, which is first off, it's important to note that authoritarian regimes always target three sectors when they take power. And those three sectors are the courts or the judicial system, the press, and higher ed for different reasons, but all because they're independent forces. And so, what the Trump administration is doing, that in and of itself is a playbook as old as time for authoritarian and fascist regimes and needs to be marked. But the particular attacks of the right in the United States on higher ed also has a very long historical arc. And I would say, the most kind of concrete moment of a real focus on attacking higher ed was in the 70s. And it's important to note that I don't think the period post World War II period was a golden age. I think it really did. A lot of Americans were left out of the prosperity of that period. But nonetheless, it was one of the most prosperous moments in US history. And it was one of the most prosperous moments in US history because of the role of higher ed, right? Because of social mobility, because higher ed creates social mobility as an engine for the economy and an engine for innovation. And for some reason, well, not for some reason, in the 60s, people of color got access to free or highly subsidized higher ed. And also in the 60s, as we know, higher ed was a backbone of both the movements around the Vietnam War and also the civil rights movement, among other things. And so post that period, Ronald Reagan was governor of California, which was one of the states with free higher ed. And he said quite explicitly when he was running for governor the second time that they couldn't allow, well, he didn't say this, his education leader said, we can't allow for an educated proletariat. That's a problem for us. And so Reagan committed to undoing free higher ed. And so they started adding fees. And that was the beginning of state and federal divestment from higher education, which led to this massive student debt and massive skyrocketing tuition we see today. And so that started happening in California. It spread across the country in the 70s. And one other thing I'll mark is that Lewis Powell became a Supreme Court justice in the 70s. But in the early 70s, before he became a Supreme Court justice, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked him to write a memo called the Powell Memo. And that Powell Memo, in the Powell Memo, Powell wrote that the U.S. campus were the biggest danger to capitalism and the future of this country, and it must be attacked. And so what we see is a sweeping arc of 50 years of defunding higher ed, which has led to a university that is more corporate, which has led to more and more adjuncts teaching our classes, which, adjuncts themselves are great, but they don't have long-term contracts and they don't have security. And it's led to skyrocketing tuition and student debt. And then layer on top of that set of attributes that have emerged over the last 50 years, a fascist attack on higher ed over the last 5 years, and you get a sector that's been completely hollowed out by the right, both through defunding and now through much more direct attacks on the sector.
I'm glad you went back to the 70s because, of course, I agree with you. That's where the formal government attack by conservatives, I think, took shape. But let's go back even a little bit further than that. Let's talk about the successes of higher education. Let's talk about the partnership that
Yeah.
developed between the federal government and higher education after World War II, which led to some of the most incredible scientific advances in history. And it was because of that partnership, a partnership which is rapidly, as you said, being dismantled now. So, if you could just talk a little bit about the successful federal higher ed partnership that we've observed up until fairly recently.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a really critical part of our country's history. Post World War II, the US, the federal government made a decision. And their decision was that they weren't going to do all of the research through federal labs, whether it's scientific research, whether it's like research around engineering or research around technology or research around healthcare. What they decided to do instead was partner with our university system. And basically, what they said was, we're gonna create these big federal granting institutions like the NIH and the NSF and NASA and even like DOE and DOD and Department of Energy and Department of Defense. And what we'll do is have grants where our faculty will apply for grants and get grants from the federal government, but do research back in our home institution. And the cost of the research infrastructure will be shared by the university itself or college and the federal government. And what that led to was, I mean, it was genius, right? No other country in the world was really doing this. Most countries really centered their research in the federal government itself. And so what this created was, I guess a thousand flowers blooming in the most like its most powerful sense. All of many of the major breakthroughs in technology and health that emerged in the world in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s started in American universities, in American labs, by American researchers. But then often, because we were the best higher ed system in the world, we also brought in the best and the brightest from other countries. They all flocked to the US to be in the US higher ed system because it was the most, and still is, although it's taken a lot of hits, it still is the most dynamic higher ed sector in the world by far. With respect to innovative cutting edge research that transforms our lives, that gets us the Alzheimer's therapy that we need, that gets us the cancer treatment that we need, that gets us our cell phones, right? All of these things start in US universities that get us the internet. And so what Trump and the Trump administration are doing is dismantling that pact between the federal government and the universities and the infrastructure that it led to. And like there's a lot of things that can be said here about it and that. But I think what really needs to be said is it's biting off our nose despite our face, right? Every single American will lose years on their life expectancy if we continue to undermine our amazing biomedical research infrastructure. Your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your child, your neighbor, every one of them needs healthcare and needs cutting edge breakthroughs in all sorts of health related issues. And we're not going to have them. And we're not going to have them because Trump and his cronies want to scoop up dimes in the couch to give back to Peter Thiel or Elon Musk. It's disgusting and dangerous.
Todd, let me ask you, because I'm not sure I have the answer to this. I understand why Donald Trump personally would want to dismantle this system. He's anti-science. He's functionally illiterate. Really, he doesn't care. He actually takes great joy in attacking higher education and criticizing so-called, well, not so-called, but intellectuals. Why? What is the real main driving force behind dismantling all of the grants for science, for example, which, as you said, has given us so much to America? I mean, like you said, the cancer research, the AIDS research, the vaccines, like you said, the cell phone that everybody has today. Here's a new article, fairly new. National
Exactly.
Science Foundation suspends grants at UCLA. What is really ideologically, if nothing else, the drive to dismantling our scientific research in this country? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't quite get that. Maybe you could illuminate that for me, enlighten me.
I mean, I think it's real. It's I'll walk through what I think the factors are here that are leading to this. But what I would say in general is it's a real small-minded strategy by the Trump administration and MAGA to undermine higher ed in order to meet their short-term goals without thinking about the long-term impacts. And so let me unpack that statement for you and say and explain what I mean. So if you look at Project 2025, there's a couple things that they say about higher ed, which are like important to mark. One thing that they mark is that if a white person gets a college degree, they are like 20 or 30% more likely to vote Democrat. Also, if they don't say this as explicitly, but what is the undertone here is if a white woman gets a college degree, she on average has about 1.1 children. If she does not get a college degree, on average, she has like 1.8 children. And so, they have this, white Christian nationalist fantasy on one hand, and so they want less white people in particular getting college degrees because if they don't get college degrees, they're less likely to vote Democrat, and they're more likely to have more children to repopulate white America. So that is actually in Project 2025. It's actually, I mean, it's stated that college is a problem for birthism or whatever native natalism. So that's part of it. Take that and put it over there. A second part is, as you flagged already, post-COVID, MAGA is anti-science. And so, going after science is throwing a little bit of red meat to the MAGA base. I think that's part of it. A third part, as we already flagged, is authoritarian regimes always attack higher ed because higher ed is an independent force in society. And they must undermine that independent force in society in order to have ideological control over society. And so, defunding higher ed is a way to get there. And then the last factor that I would mark here is, well, I think those to me are the big factors. Well, yeah, the last factor is that they want to privatize our research. And so there is a vision that the federal government and universities should be leading our research, but really Pfizer should be leading our research, or one of Musk's, or SpaceX should be leading our research, not the federal government and not the universities, especially because people like Musk believe that AI is going to move research forward in a particular way, and we're not going to need scientists anymore. And so what that means is that they want to grab this money and give it to their tax cuts without, raising the debt ceiling. And because their vision is ultimately, if they undermine this research infrastructure, they can move it into the private industry. And I just want to flag why that is so dangerous, which is like our pharmaceutical companies, for instance, depend on primary level research that they don't do in order to make their breakthroughs. And they will not do that primary research because they don't see a return on investment on that research. So the foundational research in biology and chemistry and physics has to come out of our universities, and then private companies take advantage of that socialized research to create a product that they then sell on the market and get a return on investment. And so if you do away with that primary research, you're not going to get the breakthroughs anymore. So that's a problem with it. But just overall, I think those are the factors that we're dealing with, which is a MAGA base that hates science, a desire to scoop up loose change, a desire to privatize our research infrastructure, and the impacts of a college degree on white America.
I get so many thoughts from what you're saying. I just don't have enough time to say it all. But, that primary research is going to be done. Not maybe as fast and not as well funded, but it's just not going to be done here. It's going to be done in other countries because, as you know, we have a huge exodus right now of scientists, of researchers from the United States to all kinds of countries, not just Europe, everywhere. And so that research will be done. Do they have as much money for funding as we do? Not right now, but they will. And so we're going to lose out on all that expertise. We're not going to be the primary country for scientific breakthroughs anymore. And that's not just hyperbole. That's just a fact. And that just makes me really angry. And you talked about privatizing research, and I'm sorry, my mind just goes back to fascism, Nazism, because that's what this is all about. And I have to say it, because it's out there. When you look at Nazis and fascists in the past privatizing research, I can't help but think of a Mengele and
Right.
eugenics. Yeah, they're going to do research and they're going to funnel it into a Christian nationalism type of an agenda. It's not going to be what we probably want, but it's going to be research, but not the kind of research that Americans should be doing.
Can I just give you an example of a type of project that they've wiped out? I mean, obviously, we know that there's less pediatric oncology research and less Alzheimer's research and diabetes research, and it's all like it's like astonishing. And but let me give you an example to the point of eugenics. Like, there's these research projects that want to understand why there's greater infant mortality rates in urban America, and those research projects are no longer allowed because that codes as DEI. So, like, just to your point of like eugenics and like leaving out a large swath of our population, we have a higher infant mortality rate in urban America right now. And that's a problem, and a problem we should solve, right? And a problem we can solve. Also, we have a higher infant mortality rate in rural America. But when the moment we say, I want to understand why urban Americans have a higher infant mortality rate, the Trump administration coded that as DEI and stopped that research. And that's the kind of thing that, like, you just look at it and you're like the cruelty. These people, like, not only are they authoritarian and not only are they trying to hurt so many of us with an attempt to ideologically control this country, but they also lead with such cruelty. It's not the America I was brought up in. That is not the America I was brought up
And
in.
I've written a lot about that, Todd. I'll be honest with you. That very topic, cruelty, I can almost understand some of the ideology of MAGA. I mean, I don't agree with it and it's disgusting, but I understand it, but I still can't totally wrap my mind around the cruelty, the utter cruelty day in and day out by people that you would normally not think would behave that way. People you probably pass by in the grocery store or walk by in a park, and yet when given the opportunity, they are some of the most cruel people that there is by supporting Trump and his MAGA policies. You can't go a day, an hour without talking or reading a story about what you're talking about. The story that leapt out at me recently was the governor of Iowa. Her name escapes me right now. It doesn't really matter. Attacking University of Iowa for a DEI video that they put out. That's just one of many, many, many stories. Are you familiar with that
I'm
story?
not familiar with that story, but they do so many crazy things in
Exactly.
higher ed right now.
No,
Uh,
I agree with you. And the other one is well, Harvard's always in the news right now about this. They are apparently getting hit with another DOJ investigation because they're not complying enough with the anti-Semitism investigation that DOJ has commenced. So there's still DOJ is perhaps not going to honor the incredibly stupid, in my opinion, settlement that Harvard had with the DOJ. Their DOJ is maybe going to take every dime of funding away from Harvard when all is said and done. And the list goes on and on and on with that. Let me again. There's so
David, can
much.
I just say
Go
one
ahead. Yeah,
thing
yeah, yeah.
about?
Please,
I mean,
please
I just really think we need to talk about the anti-Semitism claims on our university
go for
campuses.
it. Absolutely.
And I'm Jewish. I'm a Jewish faculty
You're a
member.
mensch. Of course, you're Jewish.
Um, and I have, like, let's start here. The people in the federal government have already shown very clearly that they have a lot of anti-Semitic beliefs. Trump sat in 2017 during the Charlottesville riots and said there are good people on both sides of that divide. Those were people that were saying Jews will not replace us, marching with tiki torches. That he said were good people, and he is anti-Semitic, and many in his administration are. And for them to say that they are going to safeguard me as a Jew or my students is a load of it's just not real. It's not honest. So that needs to be started. And so, sure, there's anti-Semitism on campus. There's racism. There's Islamophobia on campus. These are just reflections of broader society. But the point here is that they have made the claims that anti-Semitism is endemic in the pro-Palestinian movements of our students on our campuses, and then use that to take complete control over our universities. And they have not shown one shred of evidence that it is systematic and that the anti-Semitism is systematic and structured into the lives of our universities. It is not. There's evidence of one-offs. Of course, things are going to happen on our campuses, especially when students are protesting a war in the Middle East, that are going to feel anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, and people are going to feel all sorts of ways about it. Also Islamophobic. But the claim that there's anti-Semitism at Columbia or Harvard that's endemic and they have not dealt with it appropriately is not true. It is not true, and it is being used by the federal government in order to take control of our universities. That's what's going on here. It is a Trojan horse. Again, I am not saying that there's no anti-Semitism, and when we see it, we should stand up to it the same way we stand up to racism, the same way we stand up to Islamophobia or any other hatred. But let's see this for what it is. It is a ploy by Trump and Chris Rufo and all those folks to take control of Harvard and Columbia. And what the Columbia deal, I have never in my life seen a federal government have more control over an autonomous, independent institution of higher education like the Trump administration has control over Columbia. And that is a problem. That is creeping fascism.
Todd, let's get right into it. I was going to wait until the end, but let's talk about it and maybe expand upon it about what you're just talking about. I'm just enraged about the settlements that are coming down by the Columbias and the and the Harvard. Well, Harvard has stood against them pretty well, but some of the others. And you've talked about this recently. Why is I know why it's hard, but I'll just put it out there. Unless higher education, I'm talking specifically about all the universities, colleges and universities, get together, get their act together, realize, as you've said many, many times, this is an existential problem, not just for our country, but for higher education. They can't do this one at a time. They're going to be divided we fall. They're going to be knocked down like bowling pins unless they get together. And I know that's what you're all about, is organizing and getting not just faculty, but the universities together. What is it going to take, in your opinion, for university and college presidents and faculty to get together soon enough to present an organized front to MAGA, and so we don't see hundreds or thousands of settlements and takeovers like at Columbia?
David, I mean, it's the question of the hour, and I wish I had the perfect answer for you. I don't. But let me start here. The reason why Columbia settled and Brown settled and Penn settled, and we'll see other settlements, and I'm hoping Harvard holds out. I'm not sure if they will, but let's hope. The reason they're settling, I think we need to mark first, which is that they are making a craven decision. And that craven decision is that the life of their institution and financial security of their institution is more important than the future of higher education as a sector. And so they're bending the knee to Trump in order to save a few shekels, so that, but they're not thinking about the impact it will have on all of us and of all of higher ed. And so, and unfortunately, other than a few standouts, the Princeton president of Princeton has been quite good. The president of Wesleyan has been quite good. But other than a few standouts, I think this is the general trend, which is, Trump's a bully. I am not going to fight him because he's going to hurt my institution. So I'd rather recoil, put my head in the stand, and hide. And so that's our university administrators and presidents have been cowards. I'm going to say it, and I'll just underline it. And, it's unfortunate. And so my belief is that the only way to solve the problem of the attack on higher ed is going to come from the workers in higher ed, aligned with the students, and then built in relationship to other sectors of our country that are also ready to fight. We cannot rely on the president of Harvard or the president of any other institution. We have to rely on the workers and the students and the families that depend on higher ed to stand up and be the ones to lead, because we will lead thinking about the future of higher education writ large, with the recognition that as higher ed goes, so goes democracy. As our free press goes, so goes democracy. As our courts go, so goes democracy. So if we don't fight for these things tooth and nail and put our bodies on the line against a pretty extreme and dangerous government, but if we don't do that now, we might not have a higher education anymore. We'll just have what we have in Hungary, which is a completely controlled sector that does the ideological bidding of the authoritarian who rules that country. We can't let that happen.
I agree with you, and let me just make an analogy. Some may say that it's not a good analogy, but what just happened in Ukraine over the last couple of weeks, the boneheaded decision. I'm a huge supporter of Ukraine, probably one of the strongest on the internet. But Zelensky made a mistake. He made a really bad mistake. But the people of Ukraine rose up in non-violent protest, huge protest, and guess what? He reversed his decision pretty quick. So what you're saying, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be up to the faculty and the other workers, the other academic employees and staff at universities, and the students that are going to have to rise up in non-violent, massive protests consistently, not just over a weekend or through the summer, every day, just like in the 60s with the civil rights movement. It didn't happen overnight, but it was nonviolent. It was huge. It was consistent, and it worked. That's the only way this is going to happen. And I get it about being afraid. I know that the college and university presidents are between a rock and a hard spot. I get it. But you just said it again. The future, literally, the future of our democracy and higher education is at stake. If that's not something they're willing to put their school and their reputation and careers on the line for, they're in the wrong position.
You're so right, David. I feel like we're really aligned here. And I'll underline two things here, but that you said, I just want to underline. One is nonviolent, right? Because we have a very violent federal government. And so we must be disciplined and nonviolent, but stand up with our bodies, our souls, our imaginations, our solidarity, and our care for one another and for society, and oppose them, but absolutely peacefully.
Well, that's what worked in the 60s. And I really mean that. I mean, you know that. If the 60s civil rights movement had turned into a civil war or a revolution, we wouldn't be talking right now, because God knows what would have happened. It worked. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Exactly.
I mean, all of these things, they did this in a nonviolent way. They literally studied Gandhi. And they looked at how this could be done nonviolently, but massively and consistently. And it worked. It will work now. We, the opposition, need to counter the violence, the cruelty of MAGA with nonviolent, massive protests, showing not just America, the world, what America's really made out of. And save higher education and our democracy. It's the only way.
Yeah, and also lead with love and solidarity and care, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, we're going to stand up to them because we love our country and we love what it could be and should be.
The common good.
Yeah, so we're so aligned. The other point I just want to make about like Columbia and potentially Harvard and or Brown and or Penn settling is, like, you're right, like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. But let's also be honest. They've got billions in endowment. They could easily take a fifth of their endowment to ride out the problem, keep their research running. And on the other side of Trumpism, when we defeat it, which we will defeat it, they would be able to, the Fed will be back to business where we're actually supporting our research again, and they'd be fine, and it would be okay. So, like, the fact that they're not committing their endowments to get them through this period is really disappointing, because what's the point of an endowment at a university, a nonprofit university, if not to get you through hard times? Is it just to grow for growing's sake? No, it is here for a purpose, and that purpose is to ride out an existential threat without bending the knee, which is why Columbia's decision and Brown's decision is so disappointing to
It's
me.
cowardice. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just cowardice.
I
When I say they, the administration, the presidents and the provosts and all those, they're looking at their careers. They're looking at what could happen after this if they oppose the Trump administration, just like big law. Yeah, I mean, that's the exact
Same
same thing
thing.
they did. I mean, this is the same thing, and that's disgusting. They all just needed to get together. If they banded together the most powerful law firms in the world, Trump couldn't have done anything. But one by one, they bailed out, they bended knee, they kissed the ring, and here we are. So yes, about the endowments, you're absolutely right. It's cowardice. I've written about the same thing about the leaders of Europe. Who haven't fully supported Ukraine, who haven't been honest with their own people about the existential danger that they're in right now from Russia. But that's another story, but it's cowardice. It's
Yeah,
not leveling with your own people, in this case, with the students, with the student body, and with the faculties and the trustees. They are not leveling with them. They're just bending knee to save their own skin. I think you'd agree with that.
I completely agree. And it's really heartbreaking because and you said this, but I'll just underline it. You would think if there was a moment when they would see that it's time to actually sacrifice for the greater good, this would be the moment, right? You would think that this would be the moment when they shake through their fear about their future, their individual future, or the institution itself, and they step up for all of us. And you know what? If they did that, they would be in so much of a more powerful position on the back end of this if they showed courage, if they didn't show fear and fecklessness. But that's not the world we're in thus far. So we will have to do it for them.
Yes, exactly what you said. It's going to have to be the faculty and it's going to have to be the students that are going to have to rise up in massive nonviolent protests. There's just a couple of things because I know we're under the time gun here that I wanted to get to, all related. You've spoken recently, and I've spoken and written a lot about my old pal Ron DeSantis in New College. Could you briefly, in maybe 5 minutes, summarize what happened to New College? What was it just a couple of years ago, and what is it now, and how does that play into the old MAGA Project 2025 ideology and plan?
Yeah, all right. So DeSantis, has been governor for quite a minute in Florida, and many of the things they're doing at the federal level now, they sort of use Florida as a lab. Florida was a lab for with Ron DeSantis's radical right wing agenda, which is really radical and extreme. And so one of the things they did when he got reelected to governor was they like decided to target higher ed. And one of the things they did was they targeted the New College of Florida. The New College of Florida is a small liberal arts college in Sarasota Bay. It's one of the best, or was considered one of the best public liberal arts colleges in the country. Always ranked top five, always. And but what Ron saw now remember Ron was also trying to beat Trump for presidency, and he saw in the New College of Florida an attempt to turn it into this right wing ideological kind of doctrination camp, and use that program and project to beat Trump in the polls. That was the initial goal. And so what he did is he got rid of a president who had been he took over the board. He put all of his cronies on the board, including Chris Rufo, who's now probably the architect for the Trump administration's plans on higher ed. He put Chris Rufo and other cronies on the board. They fired the president. They didn't tenure like 80% of the faculty that are coming up for tenure. They got rid of all DEI programs, all ethnic studies, all programs around gender, all within like 6 months. I think from the beginning of 2023 in through the summer. And then basically 100 faculty left the university, or like half the faculty, and 10% of the students left the university. And they just turned it into this like right-wing ideological indoctrination camp, which is what it is now. It's not a university. It's not a university. It can't be called a university. It doesn't allow freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry. It has become a bastion of right-wing thought. And so like, and I think we need to counterpose it to their argument about what higher ed is writ large, because the story that DeSantis or Rufo or Trump tell about higher ed is that it's like a cultural Marxist indoctrination camp. That's what they say higher ed is right now. And I represent 50,000 faculty in this country. Let me tell you, 45,000 of those faculty are studying and teaching about black holes. They're studying and teaching engineering. They're studying and teaching biology. Very few, a small percentage of the faculty are actually studying and teaching things that are properly political. And the other part about their argument that just needs to be like clarified is I've sat in dozens of job searches. When a conservative scholar has the best work, they rise to the top and they win that job every single time I've seen it. The reality is conservative thought usually isn't able to compete on merit. It's not as strong in merit-based analysis because it's like it doesn't take much to debunk most conservative thought. And so it's true that, scholars, like, there is a more of a likelihood that a scholar that's not conservative is going to rise up, but it's only because of the merit of their scholarship, not because of their ideology. And so what they can't handle is that fascist ideology does not rise to the top in higher ed, but it doesn't because it's meritless. And so that's the story they tell about higher ed writ large, which is just clearly untrue. But then in the converse, what they've done is created exactly what they say exists, which is a university or college, the New College of Florida, which doesn't have freedom of inquiry, doesn't have freedom of thought. You're not allowed to, you can't get a job there, or you can't get tenure there if you don't have an ideological straitjacket that conforms to Ron DeSantis's view of the world. And that's what they want to do with every college and university in this country.
Well, New College has some great sports teams now for the first time, though, in a new stadium. Let's end on this because I know you've got to go here fairly soon. Could you talk briefly about the danger? This is a pet peeve of mine of making all American institutions of higher education into essentially vocational institutions, as opposed to institutions of critical thinking and preparing people for life, not just for a specific job, and to track graduates by how much money they earn within the first 12 to 48 months of graduation. What's the danger of everyone being in a STEM subject, as much as we need that, and eliminating all courses that have anything to do with critical thinking, the humanities, philosophy, literature, you name it? What are the dangers to us as a nation if we do that, which is where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, these are one of the heartbreaking questions. Look, a vocational school has a role, right? And like the ask to have like a better vocational kind of program, I have no problem with it, but it must exist within an ecosystem, right? And the destruction of the arts, philosophy, the humanities, the social sciences, even would destroy our soul, like as a nation, our ability to think about the world we're in, to ponder, to think about like the kind of world we want to have. Aristotle, said that to be the finest human is to be able to contemplate the world you're in and then engage and create the world you want. That's like, and if we don't believe that we want an educated populace that can think about the world they want to create through the arts, through the humanities, through poetry, and we get rid of that, we're not going to have a soul when we look at ourselves in the mirror in the future. We're not going to have critical thinking. We're going to have sheep, which is what they want.
And we're going to leave it on that note. Todd Wolfson, president of the American Association of University Presidents. I greatly enjoyed our conversation, and I'd like to have you back sometime if you agree.
I'd love to be back, and I'm sure we're gonna have plenty to talk about, given the way our friends in Washington D.C. or Mar-a-Lago are rolling. So
I
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me, David.
you bet you take care and you stay safe.